today we will discuss Sutta number 148 in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is called the Chachakka Sutta, which means the 6 sets of 6. That is, there are 6 categories, each of which has 6 items. Okay, and the sutta begins when the Buddha is living in Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, and after he addresses the monks, then he announces, "Bhikkhus, I shall teach you the Dhamma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing. I shall reveal a holy life that is utterly perfect and pure." That is the 6 sets of 6. Now this formula about the Dhamma being good in the beginning, middle, end, and so on, this we often find in the suttas used as a general description of the Dhamma as a whole. But here the Buddha is applying this general description specifically to the discourse that he's about to give. So this announcement calls the attention of the monks, the attention of anybody who listens to or reads the sutta, calls the attention to the importance of this discourse. I don't think that there's any other single sutta in the Pali Canon which begins with such a description of the text. So this serves to underline or to highlight the importance of the sutta. Okay, so now the Buddha first, he gives the uddesa, the synopsis or kind of outline of his subject. That is, he simply enumerates the 6 groups, that is, the 6 internal sense bases, the 6 external sense bases, the 6 classes of consciousness, 6 classes of contact, 6 classes of feeling, and 6 classes of craving. And even though we have what seems to be a certain random list of items here, if we look at the list somewhat carefully, we can see that the items fall into a certain pattern. Okay, first we have, there are the 6 internal bases. Those are the sense faculties within which experience arises. Then there are the 6 external bases, which are the objects of each of these 6 sense faculties. Then, in dependence upon sense faculty and object, there arises consciousness, vijnana. Consciousness is, you could say, the most basic, the most fundamental factor of mental life. That factor which, based upon a sense faculty, illuminates the objective field. And it is on the basis of consciousness that all the more specific, more specialized mental operations occur. Okay, so the first 3 items fall into this pattern of the faculties and objects of consciousness and the types of consciousness themselves. Then come 6 classes of contact. This is phassa. But what is contact? Contact is the contact or you could say it's the coming together of consciousness with an object through the appropriate sense faculty. So contact, though it's listed as a fourth item, presupposes the three preceding items. And contact, in a sense, depends upon the three preceding items, and it is actually the coming together of these three items. Okay, then contact is followed by feeling. But contact, it's not simply that the two are set side by side, but contact is the condition for feeling. So we have here a relationship of conditionality between contact and feeling. And the nature of the contact, as we will see, determines the nature of the feeling. And then feeling is followed by craving, which is tanha. And again, the relationship is not merely that of sort of chance placing of one after the other, a chance juxtaposition, but rather craving is placed after feeling because feeling is the condition for craving. And if we look at the last three items, they will remind us of one very familiar teaching of the Dhamma that we've come across many times before. If we consider the sequence, contact, feeling, and craving. Where have we seen that series before? Somebody said it? Right, exactly. It comes in Paticca Samuppada, dependent origination. So here the Buddha takes the sequence, or takes this set of 6 items, 6 sets of 6, only as far as craving. But the purpose of this exposition, it seems, is to knock away the support on which craving arises, which is the most basic support for craving is what? What is the most basic underlying condition of craving? No. Feeling, you could say, is an immediate condition for craving. But what is it that underlies craving and that nourishes it and supports it? Somebody said it in this direction. Ignorance, avijja, right. So the Buddha, as we will see, is going to show what has to be understood through wisdom in order to eliminate the ignorance on which craving depends. Okay, that takes us somewhat getting ahead of ourselves. Now we go back to the sutta. In the next passage, the Buddha will enumerate all of these. He will expand upon this outline of these 6 sets of 6. Okay, first he takes the 6 internal sense spaces. Okay, what are the 6 internal sense spaces? The eye base, ear, nose, tongue, body base, and the mind base. Okay, then we take the 6 external bases. These are the form-based, sound-based, odor-based, flavor-based, tangible or tactile object-based, and the mind object-based. Okay, so there is a natural an immediately evident correspondence between the 6 internal sense spaces and the 6 external sense spaces. That is, each internal sense space is keyed to a particular external sense space. So we could say each internal sense space takes as its field, as its domain, a particular external sense space. So this is the way the world becomes present to us, through the 6 internal sense spaces. The world of the 6 external sense spaces gets channeled through the sentient organism to become accessible to consciousness. And so it's through the eye base that we gain access to visible forms, ear, nose, tongue, through the body base that we get access to tactile objects. And each of these 5 physical sense faculties takes only one type of object, its own special object, forms in the case of the eye, and so forth. But in the case of the mind base, we say that the mind base has its object, as its range, the mind object base, the Dhammayata. But actually the mind base can also gain access to the 5 sensory bases, because when we perceive, say, a form with the eye, it's the eye which responds to the form, which is sensitive to the form, which picks up the form and brings it to the mind. But it is the mind base which is able to discriminate forms, to distinguish them. This is not done by the eye. The eye is just sensitive to bare, visible objects. If there was no mind base, just an eye base, a functioning eye base, and the form base, then the impact of the form would just be like rays of light coming into a camera. But the camera doesn't discriminate any form. It doesn't distinguish that is Papa, that is Mama. But the eye base, the camera just receives the light, the rays of light, and directs those rays of light as they impinge upon the film. And the tape recorder, this is like the ear base and the sounds, all alone without the mind base. The tape recorder itself has no recognition of when Bhikkhu Boddhi is speaking, when Bhikkhu Sumedha is speaking. The tape recorder, all it does is receive sounds and imprint those sounds on the magnetic tape. But it is the mind base which gains access to all 5 types of sensory objects and is able to discriminate them and coordinate them. So, for example, if you have a round, reddish object of a particular shape, then when you look at that round, reddish object, then you identify that object, or you associate that object with a particular taste, the taste of an apple. It's not the eye base which brings the sight of the apple that is able to decide or to know that this object is a fruit which has a particular taste. And it's not the tongue which is able to know that this fruit has this taste. Rather, it is the mind base which brings together the experience, the sight of a particular form with the recollection of a particular taste, so that it knows, one knows, this object will have a particular taste. If you picked up something that looked like an apple and you bit into it and it tasted like a papaya, even though the papaya might have a delicious taste, but then you'd be horrified and you'd think there's something wrong with the apple, it must be turning bad, or it must be a mutant species or something like that. And you wouldn't want to, you throw it away, you wouldn't want to eat it.
Like a critic who is expecting apples, but he is taking a potato and bites in it and then he spits it out. No? So that is, sometimes we have the critics who are acting in that way. They expect an apple that bites in a potato.
Okay, but the mind base has access not only to the 5 physical sense objects, but it also has access to its own particular types of objects, which are called dhammas. That is, any type of non-sensuous object, ideas, concepts, assumptions, suppositions, judgments, meanings. When you read a sentence, your eye picks up certain colored shapes, right? Actually, black shapes against a white background. And so all that the eye can pick up are these black shapes. Then it is the mind base which, in a sense, is your optical recognition software, in a sense. It's the mind base which turns the black holes into words. But the mind base not only turns the black squiggles into words, but it fits the words together into a sentence. And that sentence, and then from that sentence, the mind base extracts the meaning. So the meaning is something that cannot be reduced simply to the black squiggles on the white paper. Again, the meaning cannot be reduced to the words, since you might have, say, a very difficult sentence, maybe in some difficult philosopher, maybe a sentence from Hegel or Kant, and you read it, you can know each word, but you can't make sense of the meaning. Maybe Kant and Hegel are not so bad, but somebody like Martin Heidegger, you can read over and over, or Jean-Paul Sartre over and over, and can't make any sense out of their sentences. Okay, so you know each word, but to fit the meanings, the words together to get some meaning out of the sentence, that is a function of manayatana, the mind base. Some of your poems also, I should mention. I know each word, but I can't figure out the meaning of them.
Yeah, I understand. But I think that it has to emphasize the difference between the red of the apple and the rest. The red is sanya, no?
Actually, it's the sanya that...
The perception of red is sanya. What comes later, the naming and all that, that is, there it goes to another realm, to the need to form an opinion or consciousness.
No, that's... That's also sanya, but it's sanya working together with the mind-based level.
Yeah, it is working together.
Yeah. Okay, so now we have the first two sets of six. Through the six internal bases, the six external bases. Now, in order for the six internal bases even to function, one needs consciousness. If there's no consciousness, for example, in a dead person, maybe in a person in a complete coma, then, well, let's say a dead person, you have the form of the eye, you have the physical organ that we call the eye, assuming the person has just recently died, that the body is not yet decayed. We have the form of the five physical sense bases, but we cannot call them bases or faculties, because when life is extinguished, then these five organs no longer are functioning as bases of experience or as faculties of experience. Then they're just residual sensory organs. So it's actually the presence of mind or consciousness which makes them function as sense bases, sense faculties. And the Buddha doesn't take consciousness just as one kind of unitary entity, but he investigates consciousness and finds that consciousness is of different types depending upon the faculty through which it arises and depending upon the object to which it is directed. This, I think, is where the Buddha advanced beyond the earliest steps in Indian philosophy. In the early stages, vijnana, or mind, was just hears, smells, tastes, touches, and thinks. But the Buddha examined, investigated very acutely the nature of experience, and he found through his attention and mindfulness that consciousness can be distinguished according to base and object. Thus, he arrives at the classification of 6 types of consciousness. That is, there is dependent upon the eye and forms, eye consciousness or visual consciousness. This is the consciousness which registers forms, which illuminates the visible object, or which you can say is sensitive to visible objects. This again, it's like the camera. Or rather, the camera the camera is really like the eye in relation to the form. But it is the consciousness, I wouldn't have to bring it into this, because consciousness is a knowing, so it doesn't necessarily identify. But with consciousness, awareness enters the picture. So the camera is completely unaware of the form. But consciousness, perhaps consciousness can be compared to the person looking through the camera and seeing the image through the little peephole of the camera, the little window of the camera. But eye consciousness only sees forms. It has no other function. It doesn't hear sounds or smell odors or do anything else. Then ear consciousness arises through the ear faculty, and its function is to hear sound. And so we can work in the same way through each of the other types of consciousness till we get to dependent on the mind and mind objects. We have mind consciousness arising. again, here, mind consciousness can be aware of any of the other sense objects, because the mind consciousness is what coordinates different sense objects. It coordinates forms and sounds, forms and tastes, touches and forms. Usually, as human beings, we rely very heavily upon the visual sense, and then we coordinate all the other senses with the visual object. But if we were insects, then I think the most prominent sense, if we were dogs, perhaps the most prominent senses would be smell and hearing, and sound, taste, sound. So the most prominent senses would be hearing and smell, and in that case, form, taste, and tactile sensation would be connected with sound, with